For our last section in Chapter 5, we're going to look at function notation. So we're going to be using function notation to simplify polynomials. We're going to really put all together everything that we've done so far. For our first example, I want you to look at these two polynomials. So the first polynomial I give you, we're going to call f of x. We're going to name him f of x. It's x squared minus 3x plus 7. The second polynomial I've got over here we're going to call g of x. And g of x is negative 3x squared minus 7x plus 7. I'm going to ask you to do a couple things. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take f plus g of x. Now what I just did was I told you two different things. The first thing I told you was that I want you to do it of x. In other words, you are not going to be plugging any number into any of these x's. You are literally going to take it as is with the x in there. It also means your answer is going to have an x in it. The second thing that I told you that's really important is this operation. I told you to add f plus g of x. In other words, I told you to take f of x plus g of x. So let's go over here and do that. F of x is x squared minus 3x plus 7 plus, and you know you're adding from right over here, plus g of x, which is negative 3x squared minus 7x plus 7. Well, remember how to add polynomials, you just put like terms together. So x squared with x squared becomes negative 2x squared. Negative 3x take away 7x is negative 10x, and positive 7 plus positive 7 is positive 14. This is your final answer. Now you knew your answer was going to have an x in it and look like this because there was an x right here. Your answer was going to have an x because you were given an x here. Now let me show you a different example. Now I'm going to ask you to find f minus g of 1. Okay, once again, I've told you a couple of really important things right here. The first thing I told you is the of 1. You're actually going to be plugging a 1 into your x's. That's what of the 1 means. I also told you something really important, which is the minus sign. You're going to be subtracting these. So what I want is I want you to find f of 1, and I want you to subtract it from g of 1. So let's find f of 1 and g of 1 first. So f of 1, if I go into my f of x, which is x squared minus 3x plus 7, but I actually plug a 1 in for every x, I'm going to get 1 squared is 1 minus 3 plus 7. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 7 is 5. F of 1 is 5. Now let me find g of 1. Same thing. I'm going to go up here into my g of x, but instead of every x, I'm actually going to plug in a 1. So we get negative 3 times 1 squared, or negative 3 times 1, or negative 3, minus 7 plus 7, giving me a negative 3. G of 1 is negative 3. Now if we go down into what I originally wanted from you, is I wanted f of 1 minus g of 1. Well, we know what those are. F of 1 is 5 minus g of 1 is negative 3. So 5 minus a negative 3 becomes a positive 8. Now once again, I want to point out, you knew your answer was going to be a number, and the reason you knew your answer was going to be a number was because there was a number given to you right here. So let's clarify. When you're given an x right here, your answer is going to have an x in it. When you're given a number right here, your answer is going to be a solid number. For our last problem in our notes today, I want to talk about composition of functions. So here I've given you two more functions. I've given you this function right here, we're going to call him f, and he's x squared. And I've given you this function right here, we're going to call him g, and he's x plus 3. For our first example, I want you to find f of g of 4. Now this notation is called function notation composition. The reason it's a composition is you're actually going to take g of 4 first, whatever g of 4 is, and you're going to plug it into f. It's a composition of a function combined into another function, which is where that terminology comes from. So the other thing I want to point out is you're given a number here. And remember in our last slide we talked about if you're given a number here, your answer is going to be a number. If you're given an x here, your answer is going to have an x in it. So the way that we do this is you start with the innermost first. I want to take g of 4, whatever g of 4 is, and I want to plug that into f. So my first step is to find out what g of 4 is. So I'm going to go into g of x, and I'm actually going to find g of 4. So instead of x plus 3, I'm going to do 4 plus 3, which is 7. So g of 4 is actually 7. So what this does is it changes this problem to be f of 7. G of 4 is actually 7. So instead of f of g of 4, it's f of 7. Now what I want to do is I want to take 7 and plug it into f, and here's where the composition comes into play. You did this function, now you're going to compose it and do it in the f. So I'm going to take the 7 and actually plug it into my f. Well, what's f of 7? Okay, well that's 7 squared, or 49. That's my final answer. My final answer in this case is 49. Now, you knew it was going to be a number because I gave you a number here. If I give you a number here, your answer's a number. If I give you an x here, you're going to have an x in your answer. Let's look at another composition. For this composition, I'm going to ask you to find g of f of x. So there's a couple things you should notice. First of all, this is a composition because it's written this way. Secondly, you notice I gave you an x here, meaning in your answer you're going to have an x, and that's okay. Now remember, for composition of functions, you want to do the innermost first. So I want to find out whatever f of x is. I'm going to plug that into g. So the first thing I need to do is find out what f of x is. Well, what is f of x? F of x happens to be x squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and replace f of x with x squared. So instead of g of f of x, it's g of x squared. F of x is x squared, so I just replaced it or substituted it. From here, I want to take x squared and plug it into g. So there's my composition. I'm taking a function and plugging it into another function. So whatever my g is, in this case my g is x plus 3, I'm going to take that x squared and plug it in 4x. So I'm going to take that x out and replace it with x squared, making my answer x squared plus 3. You knew your answer was going to have an x in it because there was an x right here.